The morning air was thick with heat and tension as 16 Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighters of the 339th Squadron descended onto the rough steel matting of the airstrip. Their twin engines roared against the jungle silence, their strange twin-boom silhouettes unlike anything the Pacific had seen before. Hidden deep within the tree line, Japanese observers watched closely, whispering into their radios with quiet amusement. To them, these machines looked wrong. They were not the elegant, nimble interceptors they had perfected in the Zero. These American planes were heavy, oversized, burdened with complexity. The Zero, they believed, was the pinnacle of aerial design, every ounce of weight shaved away, every feature stripped to its most essential form, a weapon refined through simplicity. But these P-38s seemed the opposite, overbuilt, over-engineered, a flying contradiction to everything Japanese pilots believed about air combat. At Rabaul, headquarters of the Japanese 11th Air Fleet, the reports arrived with satisfaction. To them it confirmed an old conviction. The Americans had machines, resources, industry, but they lacked the spirit. They lacked the purity of the warrior's soul that, since Pearl Harbor, had made Japanese pilots feel invincible. What no one realized that morning was how this moment would ignite a transformation in Japanese naval aviation doctrine. In just 5 months, every assumption about American weakness would be shattered by a single mission so audacious it would rewrite the mathematics of air combat itself. The age of supremacy and tight turning, dogfights, was nearing its end. A new kind of warfare was about to emerge, long-range precision interception, delivered by machines the Japanese had dismissed as clumsy and inferior. And at the heart of it all lay their most irreplaceable asset, confidence. This arrogance had taken root months earlier. In August 1942, Japanese intelligence first reported sightings of strange twin-boom fighters in the Aleutian Islands. On August 9th, 2 P-38s of the 343rd Fighter Group intercepted and destroyed a pair of Kawanishi flying boats, the first Japanese aircraft ever claimed by the Lightning. Yet in Tokyo and Rabaul, the incident was brushed aside as meaningless, an oddity on the distant fog-shrouded edge of the war. By September, official assessments painted a picture of contempt. Reports circulated among fighter units declared the P-38s as nothing more than proof of America's obsession with mechanical excess. Too heavy, too complex, too fragile, the documents read. They predicted these aircraft would be inferior in any contest demanding maneuverability. Among those who read these reports was Commander Minoru Genda, the strategist behind Pearl Harbor. His conclusion, filed in official records, seemed absolute. The Americans, unable to rival the Zero with conventional designs, now attempt gimmicks. Every additional part is another point of failure. To the Japanese, the Zero was the perfect blade, refined to deadly simplicity. The P-38s, in contrast, appeared to be little more than a clumsy experiment. Early encounters seemed to prove them right. When the Lightnings arrived at Guadalcanal in November 1942, Japanese pilots noted that the Americans avoided classic turning dogfights. To the Zero's aces, this was cowardice, not tactics. But on November 18, 1942, the illusion began to crack. Over Guadalcanal, P-38s of the 339th Fighter Squadron escorted B-17 bombers into battle. In the clash that followed, 3 Japanese aircraft fell from the sky, claimed by the very fighters they had dismissed. While the results of the first clash were modest, they revealed something new. The P-38s refused to be trapped in the Zero's turning duels. Instead, they struck with speed from above, diving, firing, and vanishing before the Japanese could respond. Then came December 27, 1942. Over Dobodura, New Guinea, 12 Lightnings from the 39th Fighter Squadron encountered a Japanese force. The battle was brief but devastating. The P-38s held their altitude, refused maneuver combat, and in a series of lightning-fast passes, shot down multiple enemy aircraft, suffering almost no losses. For the first time, Japanese pilots faced an enemy that seemed immune to their tactics. The legendary agility of the Zero, unchallenged since the skies over. China meant nothing against an opponent that would not turn. The captured war diary of Japan's 4th Air Group later revealed the shock spreading through their ranks. It recorded with unease, "These twin-engine fighters now appear over our bases at heights we struggle to reach. When we climb to engage, they dive through our formations at terrible speed, fire, then climb away before we can respond. But intelligence continued to fail. In January 1943, a revised report circulated through Japanese fighter units. It described the Lightning as nothing more than another overbuilt American design. Too heavy, too complex, too vulnerable. Pilots were instructed to force close-range combat, where the Zero's superiority was absolute. The reality could not have been more different. The new P-38G models arriving in the Pacific could reach 400 miles per hour in level flight, climb to 40,000 feet, and with drop tanks, strike targets over 1,000 miles away. Their concentrated nose-mounted firepower, 450 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, delivered devastating accuracy. And by January 1943, American pilots were learning how to use these strengths with deadly precision. Major John Mitchell, soon to lead the famous Yamamoto mission, was refining tactics for the 339th Squadron. His rule was simple and absolute. Never give away the energy advantage. Never engage in a turning fight with the Zero. The proof came in March. From the 2nd to the 4th, during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, P-38s flew high cover as American and Australian bombers tore apart a Japanese convoy, attempting to reinforce Leh. 8 transports and 4 destroyers were sent to the bottom. The lesson was, written in fire across the sea, Japanese complacency should have ended that day, but arrogance dies slowly. The P-38s not only claimed aerial victories but shielded the bombers they escorted. Post-war Japanese survivor accounts describe their shock as the Lightnings held station at altitudes the Zero struggled to reach. By the time Japanese pilots finally clawed their way to engagement height, they were already at a crippling energy disadvantage, one that often proved fatal. Yet even this disaster was explained away. Official reports blamed surprise, blamed numbers, blamed anything but the truth. The reality, that American technology and tactics were gaining the upper hand, was denied. This institutional blindness would prove fatal. Then came the miscalculation. April 1, 1943. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto himself launched Operation Igo, a massive aerial counteroffensive from Rabaul. It was intended to shatter American air power in the Solomons and reassert Japan's dominance. Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, even stepped forward to personally direct the operation, but the results were a mirage. Reports sent to Tokyo spoke of dozens of American aircraft destroyed, of ships sunk in flames, of Japanese superiority unbroken. The truth was the opposite. American losses were minimal. Japanese casualties, many at the hands of P-38s, were devastating. In this fog of false confidence, Yamamoto made the decision that would seal his fate. He would conduct a personal inspection of forward bases, a gesture of reassurance for his men, but one that placed him within range of the very fighters his forces could not stop. On April 13, 1943, in a quiet room on Oahu, American codebreakers intercepted a Japanese naval message sent in the JN-25D cipher. For hours they worked, sifting through numbers, cracking patterns. Then piece by piece the message unfolded. It was Yamamoto's itinerary, every detail spelled out. Departure from Rabaul at dawn on April 18th, in a bomber escorted by 6 fighters, with precise arrival times at each base along his route. The translation was rushed to Admiral Chester Nimitz. He knew immediately what it meant. For the first time, America had the chance to strike directly at the man who had orchestrated Pearl Harbor. The decision was made. An interception would be attempted. But there was only one aircraft in the American arsenal with the range, the speed, and the firepower to do it: the P-38 Lightning. The interception point lay nearly 400 miles from Guadalcanal, at the absolute limit of endurance, even with drop tanks. On April 17, 1943, Major John Mitchell of the 339th Fighter Squadron was handed the mission. He and his pilots would have to plot a course of more than 600 miles, skimming the ocean's surface at wavetop height to avoid detection, threading between Japanese-held islands and coastwatcher stations. One mistake, one sighting, and the mission would collapse before it began. The stage was set for one of the most daring interceptions in aviation history. 18 P-38s were assigned to the mission. 4 would form the killer flight, their sole task to strike the bombers. 12 would climb above as cover, ready to fight off the Zeros. 2 more stood as spares. The killer flight included Captain Thomas Lanphier Jr., Lieutenant Rex Barber, Lieutenant Besby Holmes, and Lieutenant Raymond Hine. For them, precision meant survival. Major John Mitchell's navigation would have to be flawless. There was no margin for error, no room for wasted fuel. The interception had to be perfect, and it had to be over in minutes. April 18, 1943. 0710 hours, Guadalcanal, 16 P-38. Lightnings roared off Fighter II airstrip. Two had already fallen behind with mechanical failures. For 2 hours and 20 minutes, the remaining aircraft flew low, skimming the waves at 50 feet. Silent as shadows, radios dead, guided only by compass and clock. At 0934, the gamble paid off. Lieutenant Doug Canning's voice broke the silence. He had spotted them. 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers flying in trail, 60 escorts weaving above. Mitchell's course had been exact, down to the minute. Lanphier and Barber dropped their fuel tanks, throttles wide open, climbing hard toward the bombers. What followed would be debated for decades. Both pilots would later claim the kill, but Japanese records and wreckage from the crash site point to Barber's guns. His bursts tore into the lead bomber, the right engine erupting in flame. The wings sheared away, and Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's aircraft spiraled into the jungle of Bougainville. The second bomber, carrying Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, was also struck. It plunged into the sea. Ugaki survived. Only one Lightning was lost. Lieutenant Raymond Hine, last seen fighting with a 0 at his tail, was swallowed by the Pacific. He never returned. April 18, 1943. 1400 hours. Rabaul. When the surviving Zeros limped back with news of the ambush, disbelief spread through Japanese naval headquarters. Yamamoto could not be dead. It seemed unthinkable. But a search the next day found the wreckage. The admiral's body had been thrown clear, killed instantly by 50 caliber rounds. For the Japanese Navy, the loss was more than a death. Yamamoto was not only a commander, he was a symbol of naval supremacy, the architect of Pearl Harbor, the man they believed untouchable. That he could be tracked, intercepted, and killed at an exact place and time chosen by the Americans revealed a terrifying truth. U.S. intelligence and operational reach were far beyond anything Japan had imagined. Captain Watanabe, who led the recovery party, later reported, "The admiral was found still gripping his ceremonial sword. The sword remained. The man who carried it did not. Even in death, Admiral Yamamoto seemed to hold his dignity. But what broke the Japanese Navy was not only his loss, it was the precision of the American strike. The enemy had appeared at exactly the right place, at exactly the right moment. Confidence once unshakable was shattered. The intelligence revolution. The successful interception of Yamamoto forced Japanese naval aviation into a reckoning. On May 1, 1943, a new assessment was issued under the highest level of urgency. For the first time, Japan admitted what it had denied for months. Previous assessments of the Lockheed Type L fighter are hereby rescinded. Combat analysis and the events of April 18th reveal actual capabilities. Maximum speed exceeding 400 miles per hour. Service ceiling beyond 40,000 feet. Combat range over 1,000 miles with auxiliary tanks. Armament. Concentrated firepower far greater than earlier estimates. Climb rate superior to all Japanese fighters above 15,000 feet. Critical warning: this aircraft represents capabilities beyond previous experience. Avoid combat unless possessing clear tactical advantage. The tactical revolution. In May 1943, new directives were issued to every Japanese fighter unit. They reversed years of doctrine and tradition. Pilots were ordered, do not attempt to match the P-38 in climbs above 20,000 feet. Do not pursue in high-speed dives. Attack only when the Lightning is tied down in ground attack or escort duty. Disengage if it holds altitude advantage. For a service built on the creed of aggressive attack, on the belief that spirit outweighed machines, these orders were nothing less than an admission of defeat, the accumulating losses. Through 1943, the Lightning became a relentless predator in the skies of the Solomons and New Guinea. Japanese formations were broken again and again. The toll was staggering, not just in aircraft but in men. Unlike their American opponents, who often returned on one engine or were rescued when shot down, Japanese pilots rarely survived. By September 1943, most of Japan's pre-war veterans, its finest aviators, were gone. Their replacements, rushed through shortened training programs, lacked both skill and experience. Against seasoned American pilots flying the P-38, they stood little chance. The balance of air power in the Pacific was shifting, and it would never shift back. The numbers told a brutal truth. By 1943, the average Japanese pilot entered combat with only 200 flight hours. His American counterpart in the P-38 Lightning had more than 400. Survival rates told the rest of the story. After 10 missions, only 40% of Japanese pilots remained alive. Among P-38 pilots, the survival rate was twice that. The Bomber Offensive, October 1943. The P-38 revealed a weapon beyond dogfighting, its unmatched range. For the first time, American bombers could strike deep inside Japanese territory with fighter protection that never left their side. B-24 Liberators, once vulnerable to interception, now carried P-38 escorts on 1,000-mile missions. The mathematics were merciless. The Zero, even with a drop tank, could barely fight at 600 miles. The Lightning could fly twice that distance. It meant American bombers could launch from bases far beyond Japanese reach, strike at will and return under guard. The Lindbergh factor. In 1944, Charles Lindbergh, once the symbol of pioneering aviation, arrived in the Pacific as a civilian advisor. He taught P-38 pilots advanced cruise control techniques, extending their combat radius by nearly 30%. He also demonstrated how the Lightning could deliver bombs with deadly precision, transforming it into a fighter bomber without sacrificing performance. Versatility became another weapon, widening the gulf between American strength and Japanese decline. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, June 1944. The Battle of the Philippine Sea marked the breaking point. While F-6F Hellcats carried most of the fight, P-38s operating from land bases provided long-range cover and reconnaissance. Together they orchestrated the slaughter that became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese naval aviation, once the most feared in the world, was annihilated. Survivors described the same nightmare. American fighters above them, beside them, around them. Always with altitude, always with numbers, always impossible to shake. The ace race. By 1944, the Lightning was not just a tool of strategy. It was the mount of legends. American pilots competed in what they called the ace race. The names became etched into history. Major Richard Bong, 40 victories, all in the P-38. Major Thomas McGuire, 38 victories, all in the P-38. Colonel Charles MacDonald, 27 victories. The Lightning had become more than an aircraft. It was a symbol of American reach, American ingenuity, and American dominance in the skies of the Pacific. Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Johnson ended his war with 22 victories. In just 2 years of combat, he and many others flying the P-38 surpassed the lifetime tallies of Japanese aces who had been fighting since 1937. The Lightning had become more than a fighter. It had become an ace-making machine, the final assessment. By 1945, Japanese naval aviation had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. The P-38, alongside other American fighters, had not only destroyed aircraft in the skies, it had erased the very institution of Japanese air power. Generations of experience, the hard-won skill of pre-war veterans, were gone forever. Post-war Japanese technical evaluations admitted what their wartime arrogance had blinded them to. They had never understood the philosophy behind the P-38. Redundancy over simplicity, twin engines for survival, energy tactics instead of turning duels, concentrated firepower instead of dispersed weapons, multi-role versatility instead of narrow specialization, pilot protection instead of weight savings. Every feature once dismissed as excessive had proved decisive in combat. The numbers tell the story. In the Pacific, the P-38 destroyed more than 1,800 Japanese aircraft, including Admiral Yamamoto's bomber on April 18, 1943. Over 10,000 Lightnings were built, with production peaking at more than 400 per month in 1944. They flew over 65,000 sorties in the Pacific, fighter sweeps, bomber escort, ground attack reconnaissance, often on missions exceeding 600 miles. The Yamamoto mission's legacy. According to post-war Japanese accounts, its impact was devastating and irreversible. Strategically, it removed Japan's most capable naval strategist, Psychologically, it shattered the illusion that any Japanese leader was beyond America's reach, the industrial reality. While Japan strained to produce 300 to 400 fighters of all types each month, Lockheed alone built over 400 P-38s monthly at its peak, while America simultaneously rolled out P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, F-6F Hellcats, and F-4U Corsairs in staggering numbers. By the end, the truth was undeniable. The Zero had begun the Pacific War as a symbol of Japanese dominance. But it was the P-38 Lightning that rewrote the story, through range, through firepower, through endurance, and through the hands of the men who flew it. The Lightning had carried America across the vast Pacific, and in doing so it had changed the course of history, the industrial divide. Every American aircraft rolled off an assembly line, built with consistent precision, improved continuously with lessons learned in combat. By contrast, Japan's wartime factories, increasingly staffed by conscripted labor, relied on inferior materials. Quality declined year after year, even as demand grew more desperate. The pilot training catastrophe. If industry was one half of the disaster, training was the other. In 1944, an American P-38 pilot typically received over 200 hours of basic flight training, more than 100 hours of advanced training, 50 hours dedicated solely to the P-38. By the time he reached combat, he had flown for more than 400 hours. A Japanese pilot, by comparison, often had fewer than 150 hours total, and sometimes less than 20 in the aircraft he would take into battle. Fuel shortages crippled training. Instructors were sent to the front lines. The result was inevitable. American pilots arrived in combat already hardened by rigorous preparation, mentored by veterans who passed down survival tactics. Japanese pilots arrived barely able to fly in formation, and too often they never returned from their first mission. The strategic impact. The P-38's reach changed everything. Japanese planning documents from 1944 reveal the sense of helplessness. All fleet movements must account for P-38 reconnaissance and strike capability. Daylight operations within their range invite destruction. This restricts our operational flexibility to an intolerable degree. By 1944, the Lightning's long arm reached across most of the Western Pacific. The Japanese Navy, once the master of the seas, now dared not operate freely in daylight. The balance of strategy had shifted permanently. The technology gap. The Lightning was more than a fighter. It was a symbol of the widening gulf between two nations, one able to innovate, mass-produce and train to perfection, the other crippled by shortages, denial, and an inability to adapt. By late 1944, the Lightning was reborn. The J and L models erased every weakness revealed in battle. Stronger engines, hydraulically boosted ailerons, dive brakes for precision, cockpit heating for the long, high-altitude missions. The P-38 had matured into a machine without compromise, superior across every performance measure. Japan, meanwhile, could only cling to the past. The Zero, once the terror of the skies, was now hopelessly obsolete. New designs like the N1K2J George and Ki-84 Frank were excellent, but they arrived in too few numbers, too late to alter destiny, the testimony of survivors. In the ashes of defeat, surviving Japanese pilots spoke with sobering clarity. Lieutenant Commander Sadamu Kamachi, interviewed in 1946, "We began the war believing spirit and skill outweighed American materialism. The P-38 proved that technology, properly used, defeats spirit. You cannot fight physics with courage." Captain Takeo Tanemizu, credited with 32 victories, reflected, "The P-38 was not the best at turning, not the fastest, not the highest. But it was good enough at everything, and it was everywhere. We called them the twin-tailed shadows. Wherever we flew, they seemed to be waiting." The legacy evaluation, nearly 2 decades later, at a 1962 aviation symposium uniting veterans from both nations, the memory of the Lightning still carried weight. Former Captain Minoru Genda, by then a member of Japan's parliament, admitted, "The P-38 was the first clear signal we had misunderstood modern war. When it killed Admiral Yamamoto, it killed more than a man. It killed our entire concept of warfare. We believe superior warriors win wars. The Americans proved superior systems win wars." Major John Mitchell, who had led the Yamamoto mission, answered simply, We couldn't build a fighter to outturn the Zero, so we built one that didn't need to. That is the American way. If you cannot win their game, change the game entirely. The final testament. The P-38 Lightning was more than a fighter. It was a lesson written in aluminum and fire, that wars are not won by the boldest maneuver or the sharpest blade, but by the nation that can harness technology, industry, and training into a system greater than any individual. Its twin tails carved a shadow across the Pacific, a shadow from which Japan's air power would never escape. And in that shadow, the very nature of modern war was defined for generations to come. At a 1985 reunion of Pacific veterans in Hawaii, former Japanese naval aviator Kenji Yanaga, who once flew escort for Admiral Yamamoto, spoke with honesty that cut deeper than any weapon. We dismissed your P-38 in 1942 because we measured it by our own standards. We valued elegance. You valued effectiveness. We sought perfection in one dimension. You sought adequacy in all dimensions. We built the ultimate sword. You built a gun that made swords irrelevant. The death of Admiral Yamamoto was not just a mission. It was a demonstration that America could reach anywhere, strike anyone with an aircraft we had mocked as impossible. By 1944, it no longer mattered. The skies were yours. The laughter was gone forever. His words captured the truth Japan had been forced to learn. Modern war was no longer about individual spirit. It was about systems. Not about the lone warrior, but about industry. Not about elegant solutions, but about practical ones. April 18, 1943, the day Yamamoto's bomber fell from the sky, was more than the death of a strategist. It was the moment Japanese naval aviation's fate was sealed. 16 P-38s had taken off from Guadalcanal that morning, carrying more than guns and fuel. They carried a message to the world. The age of industrial warfare had arrived. From the jungles of Guadalcanal, where Japanese commanders laughed at the ungainly twin-boomed fighters, to the forests of Bougainville, where those same fighters struck down their most revered leader, to the skies of 1945, when lightnings roamed freely above Japan itself, the transformation was complete. The Japanese had mocked complexity, only to discover it was sophistication. They had ridiculed excess, only to learn it was abundance. They had dismissed the P-38 as too big, too clumsy, too American, only to realize those very qualities made it the perfect weapon for the war that America intended to fight. The laughter lasted 5 months. The consequences would last forever. The P-38 Lightning didn't just bring down Admiral Yamamoto on April 18, 1943. It brought down an entire philosophy of war. It proved that in modern conflict, the assembly line defeats the samurai sword, the slide rule defeats the warrior spirit, and industrial mathematics defeats individual courage. They laughed at the lightning until it struck Yamamoto from the sky. After that, the only sound was the drone of twin Allison engines, carrying American power wherever it chose to go, whenever it chose to strike. 16 P-38s flew 435 miles from Guadalcanal. Navigated only by compass and clock, they intercepted their target within 1 minute of the planned time. They completed their mission in less than 10 minutes of combat. And they returned, having lost only 1 aircraft. This was not luck. This was not coincidence. This was American planning, training, and technology working exactly as designed. The Japanese commanders who mocked the Lightning in 1942 learned the hardest lesson of modern war. Never mistake different for inferior. Never confuse complexity for weakness, and never laugh at the future when it arrives on twin tails with American firepower and unshakable intent. The P-38 Lightning had the last laugh, and its echo carried across the Pacific, until the rising sun finally set, on August 15, 1945.